All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Marc DeWerth from the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me, man. I was so glad that we could work out our schedules and I could get you on because I've wanted to talk to you forever and a day. I was telling you a little bit before we went on that Tim Halloran and I were talking about how he got into Bigfoot, and you were sort of instrumental in bringing him down this path that he's been on for the last few years. So we may get into that story at some point in time during the interview, but for those that may not be familiar with you, let's talk a little bit about you, your background, and what got you interested in Bigfoot to begin with.
Well, it probably started many, many years ago in the 1980s, sitting with my grandfather every Friday night watching TV at his house in Rocky River, Ohio. And I still remember an episode of In Search of coming on with Leonard Nimoy, and they happened to be talking about Sasquatch in North America. And I remember him and I watching that and the whole episode, and I was totally blown away with the stories, with the Patterson Gimlin film and things like that. And I remember looking at my grandfather. My grandfather was an attorney. He was very, very smart, very educated. And I looked at him. I'm like, Grandpa, is there Bigfoot in Ohio? And he looked at me right in the face and just said, well, yeah. He goes, I've seen newspaper clippings. My grandfather loved reading newspapers. So he would go around the state driving around and always picked up the local paper just to read the local news. Well, he said over the years, he would see little tidbits about ape sighting over here, Bigfoot seen near Coshocton, Sasquatch down by, Logan, Ohio. And you can go on and on about the different areas of the state, Akron, Cleveland, all over. And, I was totally blown away. And so the following Monday, I went to Hilliard Elementary School in Westlake, Ohio. And we always had that little library time. I was roughly in fifth grade, right around in there. And I remember going to my library time, and Bigfoot was just on my mind. But, back in those days, that was not a subject you were proud to talk about because it was kind of a taboo subject. So I kind of had to go around the librarian and said, hey, do you have any books on Native American or Indian legends? And so she took me over to this one area, and I remember seeing up on the bookshelf up there, I saw the word Loch Ness Monster. So I knew I was in the right area, and I thanked her. And as I was scanning the shelf, scanning, I looked, and lo and behold, I see this. I can get that in the camera. The Side View of Sasquatch Apes Among Us by John Green. And I remember pulling this book out and looking at the map on the back, and it says Ohio, 1718 sightings. And I literally couldn't stop, fumbling the book, checked it out. And so it was literally a book. As soon as I could get home, I'd read as much as I could, as fast as I could. And to hear the stories about Bigfoot, it just totally, I was blown away, and I was hooked from that day on. And then, obviously, getting into middle school, getting into high school, your priorities change, sports, football, wrestling, girls, all that waste of time stuff, which is funny. But, and lo and behold, it's kind of funny because my grandfather, he was the kind of guy, I don't know if you guys remember the old TV guides that would come in with your newspaper every week. So you take the big magnifying glass and look over your cleat. My grandpa, he'd scan it looking for anything with Bigfoot. And he'd always leave a message on the old tape machine saying, hey, Marky, it's Grandpa. There's a Bigfoot program on this day at this time, and so on. So I would watch him, and you'd see Renee DeHinden, Grover Krantz. You'd see Robert W. Morgan, Peter Byrne, and of course, John Green, of course. And so, of course, you were blown away by all that. And my friends knew about it, too. And it was kind of cool because during high school, we would go up to the midnight movies. They'd have The Legend of Boggy Creek. They'd have that Sasquatch movie where they go into the wilderness and the Bigfoots attack the camp, kind of a reenactment type thing, which was awesome. And I think that was a Ron Olson production, which was a phenomenal, phenomenal piece. And so I was always hooked. And it was weird because I got out, I started working in the airline industry, and I met some chick there, and she's like, hey, you want to go to a family reunion with me? And I'm like, family reunion? Where? She goes, Tippecanoe, Ohio. And I'm like, where the heck is Tippecanoe? And this was in 1988. And so I remember we were driving down I-77, which I-77 originates in Cleveland, Ohio on Lake Erie, and it goes all the way down to the tip of Florida. Well, it cuts right through Canton, Ohio, and it past the Pro Football Hall of Fame and all the way down south through where Salt Fork is. Well, I remember driving down there, and that was about the first time ever driving down in that part of the state. And I remember getting to about New Philadelphia and thinking to myself, wow, look at all these hills, look at all this forest, and look at all this stuff. And it was like funny because it was right then and there, like my Bigfoot meter turned back on. And I was thinking about, wow, there could be Bigfoots down here. But I didn't say anything to her while she was driving. And we finally get down to a little town called Tippecanoe off of State Route 800. And by the time we got down there, it was like in the middle of nowhere. I mean, big hills, heavy forest. And I was just absolutely overwhelmed with the idea of Bigfoot in Ohio. And so we pulled down her Uncle Bob and Aunt Betty's farm. And I remember you turned down the driveway and it went down this hill like this. And you could not see a house. The house was so far back around the bend of trees. You didn't even know there was a house there. You saw some black Angus cows. That was about it. We get down to the barn. I get introduced and so on. So Bob goes to me. Her uncle says, hey, you want to come out to the farm? I'll show you my he had new calves, black Angus calves. And he wanted to show me them and everything like that. So I said, okay, cool. So of course, the whole time I'm looking around, I'm thinking to myself, how do I ask this guy if there's any stories from this area? So I said, hey, Bob. He goes, yeah, what's that? I said, you get any strange animal reports in the area? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, like anything out of the ordinary. He goes, well, get a bear here and there, a bobcat, a puma, stuff like that. I said, what about anything really strange? He says, the only thing I can think, he goes, the neighbor down the road said he saw a bear walk across State Route 800 and step over the guardrail. And I'm like, really? Interesting. And I didn't say a word from there. So we go in and have supper in the house, and Betty, who was his wife, she goes, oh, I heard you and Bob were talking about what the neighbors saw down the road. And I said, well, wow, that was fast. I said, well, yeah, we did. And she goes, do you want to meet him? I'm like, really? She goes, yeah, we can go in the morning. So in the morning, we went right down the road to the next property, which is about a mile down, but on the opposite side of State Route 800. And there was a guy, and he had a little blacksmith shop on his property. And he comes walking out of the shop, says hey to Betty and everything like that. And she goes, oh, this is my niece's boyfriend. And he wants to hear about your story of the bear crossing the road. And he goes, yeah, come on in the shop, whatever. So I walked in the blacksmith shop with him, and he went on to say, he goes, yeah, I was coming home from the brick plant because he worked shifts where he got off at midnight. There was a brick plant, I think, at Midvale or Denison, somewhere in that area, which is a town north of there. And he goes, I was coming right past the Dunlap farm, and that's Bob and Betty's farm. And he goes, as I pass, the road does this kind of S like this to cross a creek. There's a creek that goes under the road. And he goes, right there on the left, he goes, I see something or someone standing there. And he goes, I hit my bright lights. And he goes, I see this big black bear standing there. He goes, it did the most amazing thing. I'm like, well, what did it do? He goes, it walked across the road in 3 steps. And when it got to the guardrail, it just stepped over the guardrail into the creek. He goes, I never knew a bear could do that. And I just said, oh, okay, well, wow, that's amazing. And he goes, yeah. So I never said Bigfoot, never said a word. Walked back to the car. He said bye to Betty. Betty and we back out of the driveway. And as we're backing out, I could tell she was staring at me from the driver's seat. So I looked over and I said, yes. And she goes, what do you really think he saw? And I said, what do you think he saw? She goes, it was a Bigfoot, wasn't it? I said, bingo, you said it. And because I didn't want to plant the seed with the witness that it was a Sasquatch that he saw, because he didn't have any recollection, didn't know what a Bigfoot was, and probably never heard of it. It's better to leave it that way. And so Betty goes, well, just so you know, there's a guy in Newcomerstown, Ohio, who does meetings once in a while. His name's Don Keating. So we drove from Tippecanoe all the way to Newcomerstown through the foothills of Appalachia and into Newcomerstown. And I'm thinking, how's she going to get this guy's phone number or where he lives? She just rolls up to the library, walks in, comes back out, has a phone number in hand, and there's a pay phone right there, which, of course, for the folks that don't know what pay phones are, that's the thing where you put silver quarters in and you dial the number and say hello. Well, I called Don. He went to his answering machine, and I left him a message, and Betty says, well, give him my number. Maybe he'll call the house tonight. And so sure as heck, he called that night, and I talked to Don for a couple hours. on the phone. And he's telling me about all these sightings in Ohio, which of course I was like, wow. And he goes, hey, I do monthly meetings. I do a newsletter and blah, blah, blah. So I did, like sent him a check for the newsletter. And I told him I would come to some meetings. But of course, I was at that ripe age of, say, 19 years old, where priorities were a little changed and things like that. And plus that drive from where I lived outside of Cleveland, I was living in Strongsville at the time, to get all the way down to Newcomerstown, it was a good solid 2 hours. And if, so you think that's a long trip, I guess, but not anymore. But so anyhow, some years had gone by and I was doing my own investigations up in Northeast Ohio. And I would typically get reports through police reports, newspaper clippings, historical data, and I end up finding the witnesses and getting to interview them and things like that. And then one day my girlfriend says to me, she goes, hey, look, Bigfoot Conference, Newcomerstown today. She goes, well, if you want to go, I'll go. So we go down to the Bigfoot Conference in Newcomerstown at the old Union Hall on Heller Drive. And so, of course, it's like, well, how do you go to a Bigfoot conference? I mean, this was like 1994 or 1995 right in there. So I had no clue. So, of course, her and I dress up. I was wearing like a cardigan, a collared shirt, slacks. She's dressed in a dress. We walk into this Union Hall. And when I say Union Hall, the building was like this. It was tilted because like the foundation was ready, or it's like maybe it was sitting on a mine shaft and it was ready to fall in or something. And we walk in, come around the corner, and as soon as we went around the corner, all these people turned and looked at us. And the only thing I could think is, oh God, we're going to be dinner tonight. And it was so funny because I'm standing there kind of shocked, and I must have said something to my girlfriend. And all of a sudden, Don Keating, who was at the head of the room, he goes, "Are you Marc DeWerth?" I said, yeah. He goes, "Hey, I'm Don. Nice to meet you." And as soon as he broke the ice, all the people that looked like they wanted to eat us didn't want to eat us. And so we went and sat down in the crowd, and there was probably, 45 people there. But the cool thing is they were from Indiana, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Michigan, and so on. And you know what the story was? The story was these people were claiming to have had Bigfoot sightings or have investigated reports and were showing forms of evidence, if it was plaster casts, photos of nests and things like that. And I told Don, I remember telling him after that event, I said, if you need anyone to help you, I'd be glad to. I had a good vehicle, and I could get away pretty often. And my schedule was very flexible. And it wasn't more than a week or two later that he called, "Hey, fresh sighting came in." And then from there, Don and I were doing investigations from roughly 95 all the way into the early 2000s. And then I took a long pause after losing my first child. And then eventually just got back in eventually. And I was in the BFRO, got into that organization real early. And I've been in the BFRO now probably pushing 20 some years. I mean, pretty long, almost as long as it's been around. And I'm a curator for Ohio, and I've investigated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reports. And, and I'm the kind of person that I'm very skeptical, even though I know they exist. You have to be skeptical during your investigations because you're only doing due diligence to make the quality of data be quality. And that's really important, to have all data be in the highest standard and quality as possible.
I definitely want to get into some of the investigations and some of the stories that you have dealt with in your investigations. But I want to go back and ask you a question about your grandfather. He was clearly interested in the subject. Do you know what precipitated that? Was it something maybe he had an experience, or did he know people who had an experience, or was it just something he was interested in general?
And what I found out later on is that Grandpa would hunt caribou, I believe, or elk out in like Montana. And that was like, with big rifles and everything like that. And there was a guy that he was hunting with. I think his name is John Varga. And if I'm right, they both had affiliation with the Cleveland Browns. I think he was the doctor for the Cleveland Browns. And Mr. Varga's been gone a long time and stuff like that. But my grandpa remembers a story that John had told him about while he was hunting for elk, and he took a shot and got one. And he says, as the elk got up on the crest, it fell to the ground, and him and his partner were going toward it. And as they did, all they saw was what they explained as the back end of the elk being flipped up in the air and something huge carrying it off on its shoulder. And the guy, and according to my grandfather, Mr. Varga was upset and shot his gun in that direction into the woods, but they didn't find anything. But he swore up and down it was like a Bigfoot that took that deer, elk, or whatever he was hunting. And Mr. Varga was a very, very intelligent man, had nothing to prove, nothing to gain by saying that story. And it was something that was kind of just, I never knew about it until my grandpa told me. So it wasn't like anyone was writing or talking about it. They kept it to themselves. So I think that's probably why.
That would definitely do it. Let's talk a little bit about the investigations. I want to get your perspective on, I do most of my stuff behind a microphone. I don't get out in the woods much unless it's here on my property. And I know that the boots on the ground investigators, particularly with the BFRO and other people who go out and really get into these investigations, I'm very curious about how you approach that as a field investigator. What is your approach to going into a fresh sighting, particularly, or maybe one that's 10 or 15 years old? How do you go into that, and how do you make sure that you're getting the information that you need to put together a solid report and basically, for lack of a better term, weed out some of the false reports and those kind of things?
Well, and I think the first rule of thumb you should do as an investigator is this. If the sighting isn't within a few weeks old, there's no rush to get to the scene. So if, let's say it's a 4-year-old report in an area that maybe you're currently investigating, so it definitely interests you, but you must remain somewhat cautious. And when I say this is, someone's going to remember, anyone can go on the internet now, and with some good copy and pasting and dropping into a box, they can make a really good story. So what you want to do is you want to get that story, and say it came into the BFRO, and I'm looking at the report and reading what they're saying, all the details, time and time, see the phone number, see the email. And so rather than calling them, say, right away, the report's 5 years old. It isn't going to do me any good if I wait another week or two. Sit on it for a couple weeks. They'll think no one's calling them, and then call them out of the blue and catch them. And when they pick up the phone and you start asking them, hey, can you tell me what really happened? And then let's say, for example, in the written report, it happened on Tuesday, May 15th at 3:30 in the afternoon. And by the time it was all over, it was 3:41. And then all of a sudden it goes from Tuesday to a Thursday, and from May 15th to May whatever. And then the time changes to 5 o'clock right then and there. Come on, folks. If you've seen a Bigfoot, or you had a big time experience, you're not going to forget the time. You're not going to forget the date. And so basically it's kind of just a waste of time. And basically you don't sit there and call them out. What you do is you listen to them and hear them out. You thank them for their time and say, well, someone might get back to you, but I can't guarantee it. But we appreciate the information, and we'll be back in touch if necessary. And just leave it at that, because when they realize that they're not getting the traction they wanted, you know what they're going to do? They're going to take that same report. They're going to reread it and drop it in someone else, other group's database, trying to get them to react to it. So you have to be real careful with that. And that's why I say always going with complete your skepticals on, like the late Ray Crow would say, keep those skepticals on, and then try to get them to convince you or sell you that the report or the story is an actual truth. If you can get them to sell where you're starting to believe, that's where you open up the investigation part. That's when you try to go to the exact location of the report with the witness. Because believe me, if the witness is telling the truth, they are going to meet you back at the location, because that's something they have to relive the experience. If they sit there and say, well, I don't have time to go back there anymore, that should be another red flag too. If you've really seen a Bigfoot, that's a life-changing experience, because it's something that doesn't happen often. It's very rare. You might as well win the Mega Million, because at least there you'll get paid for it. The Bigfoot thing, you ain't going to get anything except some satisfaction. So if you're telling the truth, you're going to go back and meet the investigator or investigators on scene and go over what exactly happened and why. And then, you know what? Let's say you go to the scene, and everything they said in the story, everything they told you on the phone equals up. And then at the scene, the description, if everything meets out, then all of a sudden you got to scratch your head for a second and say, you know what? These people might have seen a Sasquatch, and then from there, and I always say, let your witness tell you everything. Don't sit there and say, was it big? Well, yeah. Was it hairy? Oh, super. Did it look like Gumby? Yes. No. And, because if you sit there and lead them with questions, that's embellishing. So let them tell everything. And you, once again, suck in the information, have your written report in your hand as they're talking to you, giving those descriptions. Well, if everything is kosher, then you move on to that other step and we're of legitimacy. I mean, can I 100% say they did see a Bigfoot? No, but they saw something that beats the criteria that possibly could be a Bigfoot.
Very good advice. And I learned in my 16 years of law enforcement, I was a trained investigator and I did tons of investigations over the course of my law enforcement career. And one of the things I learned very early on, particularly in police involved shootings, for example, most officers who were involved in a police involved shooting did not give a statement directly after the incident. If it was handled correctly, most of the time they were told to go home, get some rest, and investigators would follow up within 24 to 48 hours because it's very difficult at times to remember a fresh traumatic event like running into something that's 8 feet tall and weighs 1,000 pounds in the woods. A lot of details get missed, and it's the same thing for police officers in shootouts and things like that. You're in high stress, it's a lot of adrenaline, and you forget things. So after you've had a couple of sleep cycles, those things tend to come back to you. So as you said, to your point, sometimes there's not even on a fresh report per se, you don't have to rush out there and be the first one on the scene within 3 hours. The only thing that might be, I guess, a great thing for that is there's evidence maybe to be collected, footprints to be photographed and cast and things like that. But as far as the witness testimony, I agree wholeheartedly with your approach. And I think a lot of investigators lead. That's the other thing that goes into investigations. You can lead people down any path that you want them to go on, right? And I saw police officers doing that. I'd be on the scene with a rookie cop and they'd be like, and they're feeding this person basically information because they've already got a suspect in mind because he hangs around in this area and they're trying to fit the two together and it just doesn't work that way. So I think that's beautiful advice for anybody who's getting into investigations from somebody who's done as many as you have. Let's talk about some of the cases and stories that stuck out the most to you over the course. And it's probably a tough question, I know, because there's been so many. But are there any that really stuck out that really compelled you that you can share with the audience?
There was one that was over like in Richland County, Ohio, I remember, and it was a female bow hunter. And she was like, she had her stand set up like in I believe if I recall, it was like in a stand of like white pines that were growing on the edge of a bunch of white and northern red oaks. And and she had her stand set up there because they had a feed plot down below. And the deer were obviously coming to the feed plot, plus the oaks were leaving massed on the ground, which obviously the Bigfoots are going to be interested in that too, because the deer they prey in Ohio are going to be feeding there. So the Bigfoots are going to have interest in that too. And but I remember her saying that when she was in the deer stand, she was just bow hunting. And as she was up in the tree stand, she heard something on the other side of this creek, on the other side of this stand of trees. And she could hear it moving in a direction from one side to the other side, but she really couldn't see it. But she said she knew there was a game trail that came down from the other side, went down to the creek, and then came back to her side, kind of like the game trail the deer would be using to come and cross to come up and get in her bow sight. And so as she was looking at this trail and she had a kind of a bird's eye view from it from up high, she sees at first what she thought was a person in kind of a parka or like a big jacket walking down this game trail. And then she realized it wasn't a person, but it was more of like a tannish brown bipedal walking hair covered creature. And she said it walked right down to the same place where the deer would go, came up the other side. And because of her view being on this side now, she could see it coming up. But she couldn't get a lot of view other than it was walking on two legs and it was moving quickly and quietly. And she said that it was just something that it was so surreal to see what she saw because it just was so fluent the way it moved and how quiet. And if she didn't see it, it could have just walked right past her and she wouldn't even known it was there. But what I liked was the fact that she explained it as like a tannish color, which is, once again, Ohio has a lot of odd color Bigfoot sightings, a lot of white creatures, the tan creatures, the silver creatures. And so, I've always wondered about those stories. And that story happened in the early 90s. And it was still during that time where Ohio was getting a lot of white Bigfoot reports. And my theory on that is kind of like this, if you get populations of any animals isolated where there is a lot of areas where they can't go far because of human encroachment, so they stay close. And when I say close, it could be 300 square miles, but it's still a big piece of land. But so when it comes to breeding or reproduction, sometimes I think they might have got forced to start breeding brother, sister, and, things like that down the line just to keep surviving. Well, that would increase your likelihood of having a white individual, a tan individual, rather than your typical dark black, chocolate brown and reddish brown, which your typical colors are. And so I always liked reports that had the creatures that were the different colors. And because, you always get your typical color, but when someone says, hey, I think I saw a Bigfoot, but you're not going to believe me. And then you're like, well, why am I not going to believe you? Well, it was white, and they're not white, they're black. And so you see where I'm going with this? It's like when you get these odd color individuals, why would someone put the effort to make a story up like that and just say, well, it was pink polka dotted, or tan, silver, white, whatever. You're thinking the typical chestnut brown type color and everything like that. So that story really stood out because I remember she had actually done a drawing of what she saw of it coming down there. She was pretty artistic, and it was pretty darn interesting when she showed it to me. And it's something I wish it was before cell phones and everything. We could just snap a photo. And don't be surprised if I dig through all my prints that I have from over the years. And when I'm talking prints, I'm talking 35 millimeter prints that I have piles and piles of them. And one day I'm going to have some of the kids look through them. It might be in there. I think I might have taken a photo of it, but it was excellent. And the description and how scared she was up in the stand. I mean, she's like, I was so happy I had my belt on to hold me up there because I could feel my legs going numb. And so it was an interesting story. I mean, that's just, one of many.
I want to ask you this, and it came up recently. I was talking to Cliff Brackman, and Cliff and I I knew where this was going to go with Cliff, but I got into the woo a little bit because I'll be honest, I'm 300 plus episodes into the show, and I would imagine maybe 20 to 25% of the people that I interview always have this, well, there was this weird thing that happened in conjunction with either right before or right after, and sometimes during their encounter with orbs and other things that would be considered woo. And I asked Cliff about that, and Cliff was like, we get a ton of reports here. I've taken a ton of reports over the years, and probably less than 10% of those have anything that would be considered paranormal outside of a flesh and blood creature in the woods. And he basically just tosses that data out because there's not enough in the big scheme of things to affect anything on any grand scale. So let me ask you, out of all the reports that you've taken, have you had those weird sort of encounters that you believe these people may have actually had an encounter with Sasquatch, and there might have been something else, maybe paranormal, going on at the same time or in conjunction with?
Well, I mean, one thing I can say is this, like in Coshocton County, different areas in Guernsey County, Tuscarawas County, areas like that, when I was doing investigations with Don, there were some nights that we were out in the woods doing squatch and stuff where you would look up in the sky, and I kid you not, like no more than 1,000 feet high up off the ground, you'd see this flashing, pulsating, just, I mean, straight as an arrow, go right over the horizon, eventually disappear. And we look at it. He goes, you got that on film? I'm like, yeah, I'm not sharing it with anyone though, because I'd be there with my camera looking up at it and, stuff like that. But in terms of actual Bigfoot witnesses adding like anything extraterrestrial, anything UFO flashing orbs, I'm going to say probably out of 400 or 500 reports I've been involved with, it would have to be under 2%. And if anything, it might have been like a flashing light seen in the distance, or like the red glowing eyes of the creature where like all of a sudden the eyes glowed or turned orange or red, like it did it like with like backlit, you know what I'm saying? Like that effect. But in terms of that, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I have heard of plenty of UFO reports in Ohio, but I have not had more than one handful ever that had anything to do where they mentioned UFOs. And everything that I had was a flesh and blood creature moving, either walking on two legs or actually going down on fours and then getting back up on two and then running. And so, I mean, so yeah, kind of like what Cliff said, I really haven't had a lot of that.
Well, you did have an experience of your own. Would you mind sharing what happened during your personal encounter with one of these things?
Well, I mean, that was a long time ago. It was April 20th, 1997. It was in Coshocton County. I remember I went down, I was hooked up with Don and a couple other people, and we were checking out an area called Sasquatch Lake over near the Woodbury Wildlife Area. And it was a Sunday, and it was kind of like that first nice day of the year in spring. It was like we had one of those springs where it rains so much that I don't know if you've ever been to the Salt Fork area, but the dam had to be opened up because they thought it was going to explode. So they let it open up and it flooded I-77. So when people came down 77, they had to get off at one exit north and then go all the country roads all the way around just to get it because the road was closed. And it was so super muddy, super green. It was just this mud bath of mess, let's say. So we finally, April 20th came along, and it was finally where things were starting to dry up again and things like that. So we decided to, go check out around Sasquatch Lake and some areas like that. And then I remember I was getting ready to go home because we just figured to call it. And I said, "Hey, do you remember what that hunter told us the year before at the deer check station?" He said that there were badgers down off of this area called down by Wills Creek. And in my Jeep, I had in the center glove box the little pad of paper that I had wrote down the information that he said. That he says, "Hey, if you know where County Road 410 is, you go down 83 South, hit 410, make a left." And he goes, it'll drop down into what is called the watershed area, which is wildlife area, Corps of Engineers. And he goes, when you look to your left, you'll see two huge Jeep tire lines, because we would drive our Jeeps as far back in the woods as we could go before we got out, because they would walk back to fish some old ponds that were back behind the old coal piles. And so sure as heck, we go over to check this out. And I come down the road, I'm leading the way, and I'm looking to my left, and there's the huge ruts that he explained. And we literally just walked down, followed the ruts all the way in. Eventually it became a trail, and it was a strip mine. And if you know anything about strip mines in Ohio, they're kind of like a staircase, like tiered. And so we just followed the one tier. And he says, if you follow the tier of the back, there'll be a big coal pile back there. And that's where the badger dens, or where the badgers they saw. And which badgers at that time, this would have been 1997, were not known in Ohio, especially that part of Ohio. And even today in eastern Ohio, I don't think there's any kind of population of them. There are some in extreme western Ohio near Indiana, but not like, many years ago like that, no. And so we had hiked back, followed this trail. We eventually came all the way back to this coal pile, and it was probably about a mile and a half back. And we looked around. It was a kind of a perfect spring day, 50 degrees. The budding was just starting to get a little green. And I remember, Don says to me, he goes, "Hey, there's a bald eagle's nest on the other side of the Wills Creek. I'm going to go check out. I'm going to head back to the car." And so we had those first generation Motorola two-way radios. And those were actually pretty good, by the way. They were a lot more powerful than what was stated, because they didn't have the technology to turn the power down. So they had great range, where the new ones today, even though these had just as good as anything like the Balefons or any of the good ones today, just as good range. And so he eventually got to the road probably 25 minutes later, said he was there, and he was driving away and going to the other side, and he was gone. So me and the other guy, I looked at him. I said, well, let's look around. So I climbed up on this huge coal pile, and I remember looking around and seeing the big high wall to the left. Because then when I say high wall, when they strip mine, they create these gigantic walls, sometimes a couple hundred feet high. And then the next tier comes out, drops down, because the trucks would follow those tiers out, taking the coal or the natural resources out. And that area was probably reclaimed in 1958, I believe, which means they had to replant it and walk away. And then all these years later, you have, 40-year growth. So there's a kind of a forest in there, let's say. And so I got up on the coal pile, and I remember turning around and looking, and the other guy, I called his name. I go, "Where are you?" He goes, "I'm right here." He raises his hand, and he's in these, brush, but it was still thick, even though it was barely green. And so when we got down, I said, well, let's just follow the middle tier out because all the tiers would eventually go back to the dirt road and go down the decline down to where the Jeep was parked. And so we started following it out, and it was like no more than 2 or 3 minutes into the hike out where we heard all sorts of movement on the tier above us on the strip mine. So if we're walking like, say like this, there's a tier up here like this, there was something up there moving around. So we didn't know what it was and just assumed it was white-tailed deer because there's deer bedded down everywhere up there. And so we kept going, and then we'd hear a bunch of movement again. We'd stop and look, not see anything, and it just continued on and on. And I finally said to him, I said, "Hey, why don't you do this?" I said, "You got a camera?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "I do too." I said, "Go ahead and take the lead. I'll give you about a 5 to 7 minute head start. If we split up, we'll probably get the deer herd to panic, and we'll see how many there are." And he says, "Okay, that makes sense." So he walked away, started going down the tier or the trail, let's say. And I just sat there, and it was probably 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 minutes. I waited and, pulled a thing of water out, had a little sip and whatever. And so I just stood up and they to explain the day, sunny, no wind, birds chirping, everything was 100% normal. Started hiking. So as I started moving, within no more than a minute, I hear all the movement again up above me. And I stop and I turn my head, look up and keep going. Again, I hear all this movement. Stop, look up. And finally, I'm just like to the point, it's like, I came to the realization that this wasn't deer. But here's what was my fear. My fear was this. There was rumors of a panther down there or a cougar. And anyone knows how cats play. You go, they go. You stop, they stop. And I'm just thinking, oh, Lord, I don't have a gun. I don't have anything. So I had a can of bear mace, pull that out, have it in my hand. So as I'm hiking, I'm looking like this up the tier above me. And as I'm going, then all of a sudden I'd hear movement. I'd stop, it'd stop, I'd go, it'd go. And it seemed to went on forever. And eventually it got to the point where way in the distance, because the way the strip mine, all those tiers would go down like this to go down to the dirt road. And I could see way in the distance, the road in the distance. It had to be almost 500 yards out, but I could still see the road. And because the way I was up higher looking down. And I got the impression to myself when I was going to get ready to go down the decline, well, if I run, I could run like hell and try to get out of there. Well, if it's a cat, it's going to come tearing out after me and pounce on me. So as I was starting to go down the decline, I just decided to sit on my rear end, and I did. So as I was sitting down the decline, sitting and listening, and I'm fully expecting to hear all this movement. Well, guess what? Like nothing happened. And a couple minutes goes by, nothing happened. So I'm like, that's strange. So as I just getting ready to stand up, and to my left were some mid-sized pines that must have been planted in there. So, and they were probably maybe 5.5 feet high at most, 4 to 5 feet, most of them. And I was sitting next to them. And so as I was getting ready to stand up, all of a sudden I hear plain as day above me. And when I say above me, it's to the left-hand side, that'd be my left, on the tier above me of the strip mine. And I remember, and I hear plain as day, crunch, 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 like right over the top of me. And I'm like, oh no. The first thing that came to my mind is, down in that part of Ohio, there was a lot of precious crop growers, if you want to call them that. And they would hire people with guns to protect their cropland. And I thought to myself, well, maybe when we were back by that strip pond or that big mound of coal, they had like some cash crops there. And he was following us out, making sure we were leaving and everything like that. So I'm like, oh, geez, because I've had encounters in the past with the same type of people. And so as I slowly stood up to look over the pines, I stand up completely and I'm looking up and there's nothing there. And I'm like, what the heck? So I look down in the direction where my vehicle would be. And then I look back in the direction of the trail. And as I pan back, I noticed to about a angle this way, I see something squatted down up on the tier or should I say the incline going up. There was something squatted there, jet black in color. And I'm like, oh my God, it's a black bear. And because it was real sunny, it looked totally like a bear in a squatted position. So I go to pull my backpack off And in there, I had a camcorder, a big camera, everything. And so I go to pull my gear off, and it made a bunch of noise because I had one of those, I don't know if you've ever backpacked, but the big metal frame ones. And so they have a tendency to be more supportive. But when you go to take them off, they're real tight. They make noise, made a little bit of noise. And when I did, this thing goes from this compact squatted position, and it looked to be looking down toward the road in the distance. It stood up. And when it stood up, the first thing I saw when it turned its torso, not a snout or ears, I saw a flat profile and an ear on the side here. And I was like, oh, shit. I don't know if I can swear, but you know what I mean? You don't want to know what I said. And so immediately it turns and looks at me, and I'm like, with my jaw hanging out, it literally goes, and I like go to reach down in my bag for my camcorder that was on top. As soon as I made the move to reach down, it turned and immediately went right up the next tier of the strip mine up over on the plateau. And I don't know why I did this, because just in excitement, I grabbed my camcorder, got it on somehow, dragged my bag to where it was standing, and ran up the tier where in the direction it was going. And I started filming. So here's me filming with a camcorder I had just bought. I had never, other than turned it on once, ever played with it. I'm trying to get this thing to work, and I'm shaking so bad. I mean, when I say shaking, this arm was vibrating like this. And I realized that. So I actually stopped recording and just trying to, calm down a bit, got the camera back recording, and I could see the direction it was going, only because there was no wind that day, and the tops of the trees in the distance were splitting like this as it was going in that direction. So as I was filming in that direction, probably saying some very nice choice words, to my left, the strip mine went up like at an angle like this. It was kind of like the turn where I was at, where it went. So on the turn there, I'm right on the corner. It was going this way. To my left, something starts coming down the hill toward me. And the only thing I can explain is take a deep freezer full of food and drop it down the hillside and listen. And I'm like, oh, and I panic and go to the left, start filming. And as I'm filming, I'm freaking out. I mean, it was totally freaking out. And then all of a sudden, I heard my name called. Well, the other guy who was down at the road waiting for me lost patience. He came back up the trail and yelled my name a couple times, and I heard him. And I said, I'm up here. And so when he came up, I remember he comes up the hill, gets over to me, and he looks at me, he goes, "Would you just see a ghost?" I'm like, "Oh, Bigfoot." He's like, "What? Where?" I'm pointing and everything like that. And so we stood there and tried to coerce this thing to come out. And it was to no avail. But I was in such, should I say, shock. And I didn't realize it. I mean, the guy told me I was white as a ghost. And he's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" I go, "I just want to leave." And I literally put my tail between my legs, went down to where my bag was laying by the tree it stood by, where it was stood up by, and we went back to the vehicle. Well, the only smart thing I did on April 20th, 1997 was take some orange tape, tie it around that tree a bunch of times, and leave with my tail between my legs and drive home. And to this day, I don't remember anything about the drive. And it's 2 hours. And I remember getting home, showing my girlfriend the film. She's yelling at me, "Why didn't you read the directions, you idiot?" Blah, 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 blah. The whole 9 yards. Guilty as sin, folks. I messed up. And I always said if I ever saw one of them, I would be prepared. And I wasn't. My camera wasn't in my hand where it should have been. All these rules of thumb that I broke my own rules, and see what happens. And so I got my one experience. And I'll never forget it. And I'm thankful to have it. But if I could have done it all over, I would have blown the Patterson-Gimlin film away. It was like 75 feet away. And so the following Sunday, I got 10 people to meet back up with me. We went to the same location. Well, now think of it this way. April 20th in Ohio in spring. It rained all week. 7 days later. What do you think the little pea foliage was 7 days later? It was like this. So I couldn't find where I was standing. So we combed around the area, and then someone found the orange tape. And when we found the orange tape, we knew where it was. We correlated where then I found the bush, found everything correctly. And that's how we got the 73 feet. But the bush or the tree that it stood up by when it stood up to turn to walk away, it turned its torso. And when it did, the top of a branch hit right off here and it bounced and it went up the tier on the strip mine. So we measured from the ground up to that branch. It was 8'11" off the ground. So, and the creature was jet black in color, very clean, very healthy looking, very muscular. It was obviously a male. It was so barrel chested. And I remember when it turned the way its ass or its rear end, it just was huge. And it went up the hill like it wasn't there. And the one that I do have a film of something, and it's something I don't show. I'm very embarrassed about it, even though I do have something on film a little bit. And it's just something I'm not proud of. And that's just me personally. And but let's just say this. The one that I filmed is not the one that I saw. The one that I saw went this way. The one that I filmed came down the hill from the other direction. So that whole time we went back there, three of us, there was probably a group of them laying down or resting up above. Three people go by. They followed us all the way back. What are we doing? One person goes back. One probably followed that person back. The two of us start moving, and then we split up again. So what does it do? One had to stay back with me. One had to go the other way. I don't know. But so we feel that there was a group of them there bedded down or just resting during the day, because that's a good area. And, lo and behold, it happened. And when it did, all I can say is that because of that day, I'm still in Bigfoot. I was really getting frustrated with Bigfoot as a whole, because let's face it, and I'm sure you see it too, you get these witness reports and you get out to the scene and it's 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old. There's no physical evidence. It's frustrating. Again, that we were the same way. And just remember, when we were doing all this, there still wasn't all these internet reports coming in. These are people calling sheriff's departments, calling the newspaper, calling media sources that we were getting this information. So these people were the few that were willing to talk about things.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I've been so frustrated recently. It's been sort of the theme for my 2023 so far, is why we aren't further in the proving that these things are real. So you mentioned the Patterson Gimlin film. I've had conversations recently. I was on Squatch Talk with Pat a while back as a guest over there. And Pat gave the correlation of, the Patterson Gimlin film in 67 basically put us on the 5-yard line in Bigfoot. And we've not moved, in my opinion, much farther than that down the field. So why do you think that is? Why do you think there hasn't been more advancement over the last, let's say 10, 15, 20 years in Bigfoot? I know a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that. So I want to get your opinion. Let's talk a little bit about the Patterson Gimlin film first and foremost. What do you think about that film? Do you think that's a real Sasquatch?
The Patterson Gimlin film is no doubt a real Bigfoot. I have been to the site now 3 times. And many years ago, that in the early 2000s, then in 2017, and it's changed dramatically. And back in the 90s when I was there, the closest you could get to it, to even hike into it, was like pushing, I think, 11 miles one way in. So let's just say this. If you're going to sit there and wait for Roger Patterson in a Bigfoot suit, why would you do it there? Why would you be waiting, for him to show up, to jump out? And plus Bob Gimlin was there too. And I've, known Bob for years, and there's no doubt something went down. And I've talked to Bob many times, and folks, if you, even today, you can get as close as 2 miles to the site, because they have more forest roads going back into there. But even then, it's a big hike going down, big hike going up. And, the likelihood is slim and none that this was a perpetrated hoax. What you see in there is a biological, moving, hair covered, breasts hanging type creature. And you know what? I think if you deny that fact as being the first 5-yard gain in Bigfoot, you're missing the boat. I mean, going forward, has anything been accomplished? Yeah, there's been some things accomplished. Dermoglyphic ridges, or dermal ridges and footprints. The cast correlations between fingerprint experts finding casts in one place and finding it 60 miles being the same creature. Yeah, so there's been some things. Plus, now you're getting science. A lot of academia showing severe interest in the subject matter, and they wouldn't be showing interest if there wasn't some concrete base of evidence that they're seeing that says, hey, something must be here. But I think the biggest problem, and it's no different than it was back in the day, because I knew Renee Hinden, I knew Grover Krantz, I knew John Green, I knew Peter Byrne, I knew Bob Titmus. I've met them all, hung with them, listened to their stories, and you know what? And this is the truth, and it's the sad truth, is even back then, all they did was argue about who did what and who did this, why, and who got credit and who didn't. And it's no different today. And now it's even worse because of the internet, because of social media. Anyone can have a Bigfoot report and be on a podcast the next day. Is it a real report? Probably not. They just want to be on a podcast. But the fact is that until people decide to bury the hatchets with each other and just move on and actually truly cooperate, for the common good. And the common good is like not only proving these things exist, but it's also saving the species from potential extinction. But, and I will counter that. I feel that they're doing quite well. I truly do as a species, but just because of the areas of the country where you see the sightings coming out and they're really investigated by really good investigators. So there is something there. And let's face it, if you guys know anything about forestry, the whole east coast of the country was pretty much deforested at one time by the late 1800s. So if there were any Bigfoots there, which there were, they either retreated deep in the mountains of West Virginia, deep way down in the hollers, and they probably had tough times, especially reproduction, et cetera. But eventually now the woods has come back. And like, for example, Ohio in 1890s, Ohio was like 12% forest. In 1980, it was up to like 29, 30%. Now it's sitting at like almost 40%. So when you have forest, you have white-tailed deer, lack of natural predators. It's not like we have wolf packs or cougars running around all the time. A Bigfoot's going to prosper in this opportunistic environment.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And that's one of the things that Cliff and I kind of got into when we were talking the other day is there has been things out there. And he shared some information with me about, for example, the Freeman footage. I had Michael Freeman on a while back. He just did the book and sort of completed put all that his dad's stuff together. And he sent me a copy of the enhanced version of the Paul Freeman film that there's the book, right? The Freeman Bigfoot Files. You guys can go over at Hanger One Publishing and pick up a book. Doug, you can send me a check for that later. But I was talking to him about the enhanced footage that Doug did. And I know Cliff has done his own version of that enhanced footage of the Freeman footage, but Cliff was talking about the footprints. And he said, even still with the enhancement of that film, it's difficult to see conclusively what's there. It looks like a Sasquatch walking over and picking up a baby off of a tree to me. That's just me. But when I was talking to Cliff, he said, those footprints that were cast that day by Paul Freeman are known by other researchers to be cast in other areas from one specific individual. And I didn't know that. So when I put all that together, I was already kind of 50-50 on the Freeman footage. But once I had a conversation with Michael, I saw the enhanced footage that Doug worked on, which is a part of the book. So if you got the book, you've probably seen that yourself. Yeah. And then talking to Cliff about the footprints, I put all that together, and now I'm about 95 to 98% sure that in addition to the PG film, I think the Paul Freeman stuff is 100% real. And, I got into a conversation with Thomas Steenberg about that. He was always in Paul Freeman's camp, and then that just suddenly flipped one day, and he just became this anti-Paul Freeman guy, and everybody looks at, not everybody, a lot of people in the community now, you mention Paul Freeman, and they say hoaxer. I think you need to take a look at the Freeman files and get some more information before you go there, just in my opinion. But I don't know where you are on the Freeman footage. Obviously, you've seen it. What do you think about the Freeman?
And because I know Meldrum so well and have really talked to him a lot, and he was very, very positive about the trackway that was casted there. He was one of the first people to get there, casted some himself. I would have to say that I think the Freeman film is legitimate. It has the right characteristics that you'd look for. And granted, Paul, might have made some statements back the day that he regretted, but you got to remember, and I hate to say this again, there was so much influx and hating in the community even back then. people try to up everyone and they make mistakes doing it. I mean, do I think that's not a legit film? I think it's probably the real McCoy. I do. And, I've always thought that about that because I've been to Walla Walla. I've been to that Mill Creek area, and that is as squatchy as it gets for the Pacific Northwest. And there's constant stories long before Freeman, long after Freeman that substantiate some of those claims. So, that's one of those ones I'd have to say is pretty legit. And, another one would even be like Don Keating's 1992 footage in Ohio on August 2nd. I know it's quick and glaring and glimpsing because he didn't see it. He accidentally filmed it. But believe me, if you've been there and done all the reenactment and measurements of where it was, where he was standing, it's the only thing it could have been is a Bigfoot. I mean, so it's just, just one of those things. And like I say, I always tell people, always, be skeptical, believe what you believe in, but don't sit there and, go after someone else because they believe a different viewpoint. There's nothing wrong with having varying or differing viewpoints.
Very good point. Let's talk. We mentioned it earlier. Let's talk a little bit about the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. It's coming up this year. Who do you got on the docket there? What have you got coming up? Can people still get tickets? Where can they find information about the conference? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, the conference is on the weekend of May 6th at Salt Fork State Park Lodge and Conference Center outside of Cambridge, Ohio. That's in Guernsey County. It's a 144 room lodge, and then they have like 55 cabins. And then there's a state park campground very close that's like another 300 sites. And we sell out everything completely way in advance. Like when the tickets go on sale, I usually do two periods to sell them. They sell out. The first batch sold out, I think, in 90 seconds. The next batch sold out about the same time. So in terms of tickets to actually see the speakers, they're all sold out. But the event on Saturday, there's going to be over 55 vendors on 3 levels, 7 food trucks. All the speakers will have tables out in public viewing areas. So when they're not doing their lecture, they will be there meeting and greeting people. It's open to the public, free. Families are welcome. It's family friendly. And there'll be every kind of Sasquatch, Bigfoot, cryptozoology, anything like that gear, T-shirts, footprint cast, books, videos, posters, chainsaw carvings, jewelry, metalwork, everything imaginable is there. Even Bigfoot cookies and everything. And it's just a hell of a good time. And like I said, they're going to have 7 food trucks this year, which is going to be great. So it's going to have a wide variety. And like I say, it's family friendly, free to attend, and you'll have a great time. I mean, be assured, we get thousands and thousands of people that come in that day. I think that before COVID, I think one year we had over 5,000 people come through. And when you go to the lodge, it's like off the highway. It's like 12 miles off the highway just to get to the lodge. So people come from all over the place. Not only Ohio, we have people from that register that have tickets, I think this year from 31 states. So they come from everywhere. And if I had a bigger venue, I could sell another 500 tickets in a blink of an eye. I mean, they'd sell out like that. And this year I have Renee Holland coming back, and I have Cliff coming back by popular demand. And then I have David Becara speaking. David is the owner of Expedition Bigfoot Museum in Cherry Log, Georgia. Phenomenal investigator, phenomenal guy. And I just can't wait to hear him. I have I'm just trying to think. Adam Davies is coming to speak on his Bigfoot investigations in North America, which is going to be fantastic. And obviously you kind of let the cat out of the bag that the MC this year is going to be Tim Halloran. And, obviously Tim came out with his book, The Bigfoot Influencers. And and like I say, Tim's a good friend of mine. And I thought that this would be a good way for him to introduce himself to the Bigfoot community and, help promote his book a little bit and everything like that, which it's a great book. I definitely recommend it. And then I have one more speaker that's going to be announced on this coming Sunday. So I can't tell you. And but like I say, there's a lot of things. And already like for 2024, I already got 3 speakers committed. and it's going to be another amazing lineup. I got a couple speakers confirmed that have never spoke at OBC before, so this will be first time, and they're big names, big hitters, and so I guess I'll let you people just imagine who that might be, and so it's going to be great, and like I said, we get a lot of big name people that come to the event anyways, so it's like, it's not like there won't be people. I mean, there's going to be all the people. Dr. Russ Jones will be there. And, matter of fact, I just got this in the mail. I got his newest edition of the Tracking the Snowman. This is the new revised edition by Dr. Russ Jones. I can't wait to read this, because the West Virginia Bigfoot story is there's just so much data coming out of there because of Russ and some of the other investigators there. They're doing such a good job documenting it. And so I'm excited. And like I say, I just come on out, check it out, have a good time. That's all I can say.
Well, I will definitely link to it in the show notes. You guys, it's on my bucket list for 2024. So I hope to get out there in 2024 and hang out with you guys at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. Marc DeWerth, I can't thank you enough for your time and coming on and sharing all that with us today, man. I've had an absolute blast. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on.
Well, I appreciate you having me. And, and like I say, Tim recommended you. So, if Tim says it was okay, I said, okay, because I typically don't do a lot of podcasts, but I like this setup you have with this platform, because it's real easy for me, where some of them that want you to use a laptop and, these special headsets, I just don't have a lot of technology in terms of computers. Because to me, I get a new computer and 6 months later, it doesn't work. And then it's like, so you know how it is. But anyways, well, I appreciate you having me on, and you have a wonderful rest of your week.
They say you don't gotta go home, but you can't stay here. And no, I don't wanna be alone in the world out there.